This episode is brought to you by Fuli Gemstones.
Well, I think he was certainly a trendsetter, and he opened women's eyes, which didn't require too much opening, to the possibilities of what they might wear and how glamorous they might look and beautiful. And he created that, and also he created the ethos of modern jewelry, which he did by simple wire setting with platinum iridium alloy.
I'm Carol Woolton, the voice of jewelry. Welcome to If Jewels Could Talk. I'm an author and broadcaster, and the woman who initiated the role of jewelry editor at magazines like Tatler and Vogue. This is a podcast for everyone, for people who do like jewelry, for people who don't realise they like jewelry, and anyone intrigued by fascinating facts, new ideas, and forgotten histories. So join me as I tell sparkly tales and meet all sorts of people, delving into 4 centuries of jewelry culture, and investigate what's happening now. Today, we are going to talk about the American icon Harry Winston and his incredible rags to riches story as the son of an immigrant in New York who chased the greatest diamonds in the world, became the preeminent jeweler for both Hollywood and high society around the world, and was acknowledged to own the second largest collection of historic jewels in the world, runner-up to the Queen of England, no less. He's the subject of a new book called The King of Diamonds, written by his son, Ronald Winston, with William Stadium. Ronald took over the reins of Harry Winston from his father and secured its place as the global brand synonymous with taste, luxury, and diamonds. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Ronald Winston from California. Hello, Ron. Thank you very much for joining us.
Lovely to chat with you, and thank you for the introduction.
I can now, in the words of Marilyn Monroe, who said, "Talk to me, Harry Winston, tell me all about it," I'm going to say, "Talk to me, Ronald Winston, tell me all about it."
Well, you ask, I shall tell.
I mean, you mentioned to me earlier that you recorded your father and his stories. I was very interested. I mean, at what point in his life did you sit him down and ask him all these questions?
Well, it happened for about 2 years in the south of France, where we were vacationing together, and I used to love to go there with him, and I would ask him questions, and I had to hid the tape recorder. So I did that for 2 years, probably 77, 78, in the summer in August.
And so how old was he?
He was about 80, 81.
And did he love reminiscing and recounting the stories?
He loved telling stories. He was a great storyteller, and he had a wonderful voice and was a fabulous raconteur.
And you felt it was important to get these stories down?
Well, I thought that nobody would have any knowledge whatsoever if I didn't record and write and create a history of him and the family.
And then it took you many years to write the book.
Well, it did. It took me about 10 years.
Well, it's full of detail. And what I wanted to ask you first was, could you set the scene of what your father's early life was to give people an idea of where he came from to emphasize these extraordinary achievements?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can. I mean, my father was the family was dreadfully poor. They were Ukrainian refugees from having come over about 1880. My uncle said, your father won't remember it, but I remember it, that he wouldn't drink his glass of milk. And that was the only luxury of plenitude that he had, was a full glass of milk. So they were dreadfully poor. They lived in New York first, and then later on in downtown Los Angeles. I asked my father, "Why did you leave L.A.?" He said, "Well, I couldn't make money from poor people because there were no rich people in California in those days. They were just maybe 1 or 2, but it was really a very poor community. The community of wealth and culture, of course, was San Francisco." Mm-hmm. And my grandfather would take my father few times a year to the opera, to the San Francisco Opera.
And what was your grandfather doing at this point? Your grandfather was selling?
He was a jeweler, but not very successful. But he didn't really understand America. I never met him. I would have loved to have met him. And he brought the family to L.A. because he didn't have very good lungs. And New York had, as you can believe it, L.A. had the purest air.
And was your father at school at that point?
Oh, yeah. He was there up until about the 9th grade. And then he stopped going to high school and had to work.
So he became a runner for your grandfather?
Yeah, he would run around and he would fetch this and fetch that. And I guess they saved money on the subway and buses. He would run.
And so your father was running with a purpose. He was running up and down to the Diamond District, was he?
Yes, absolutely.
So they lived in Los Angeles and then moved back to Manhattan?
They came back. I mean, my father eventually, I guess in 1914, was drafted and called into the American Army to be prepared to fight in Europe in World War I. And so he ended up doing the cooking, I think, for the regiment. And he never was shipped off to Europe. And the war ended in whatever it was, 1718. And he decided that he was going to come east. And he came east, I would say about 1920. And he never went back.
And you talk in the book about a seminal moment for him at the opera in 1915.
Yes, well, he used to scan the doyens of the opera, who were in boxes, private boxes, and he would scan their jewels on my photographically memorize what they had.
And you said that it was watching the entrance of one particular woman, Mrs. Charles Crocker?
Yes. They were high up. He was down in the floor of the opera house, and he could look up and see all these great ladies who were a great view of the stage, but he had a great view of them. So he photographed mentally their jewels, their clothes, and he would recount these things to me.
That's amazing. So he would sort of log the jewels that he might want to get hold of if they became up for sale at some later point.
Yes, absolutely.
Because that Mrs. Charles Crocker, you said, was wearing 7 ropes of natural pearls.
Yes, she had a huge pearl necklace. It's a wonder she could walk. It was probably very long. 6-7 feet long if you stretch it end to end.
Incredible.
And he said, in those days pearls were really valued. Then they went way down with the cultured pearl. And then they went back up very slowly over 25 years.
Why did your grandfather get into jewelry in the first place?
He came over in 1880, 85. And he went to a firm called Waller, Whiskey and Man and was trained in watchmaking. So he did have some peripheral background in jewelry making, watchmaking, and eventually stones. Although stones was more my father's thing. And he'd find a little stone, he'd make $1 or $2, and he said we had to make $1 a day to survive, $1 a day profit. Kind of amazing, but there it was.
Wow. So your father learnt on the job from his father. Is that why he got hooked on jewelry?
Well, I don't think my father was very good at teaching. My father himself had his own natural sense of things, intuition, if you will. Mm-hmm. And he would look at things and he'd know what it was worth. And of course, there was the famous story of the emerald that he saw for 25 cents. It was a green stone, as it said in the sign on there. Green stone, 25 cents. My father bought it, and they sold it for something like $800, which is an immense amount of money in those days.
And that was a 2-carat emerald.
I think it was something about that.
So it looked like a little trinket, and he could recognize that actually it was a good stone. It
was not a green glass stone. It was a emerald from Colombia. I mean, today, who knows, it would be worth $250,000. Anyway, that was his first coup when he was a young boy. My grandfather didn't have a clue.
Oh, really? So your father just had the wherewithal of how to do the mechanics of it from your grandfather, but had an innate sense about stones himself.
Well, he had an inherently microscopic view of color. He would see color where people would see, oh, it's white. And he'd say, well, it's white with overtones of pink and yellow. And that helped him in the determination of what stone was great and what was a gem.
So he was kind of mesmerized by the colors.
Yeah.
And did he try and teach you that? Did he show you stones and teach you?
Yeah, he did. He would often come home with something in his pocket in a parcel paper and say, darling, I want you to remember this is a pigeon blood Burmese ruby. And he'd pop this thing out on the table, I don't know. And I would look at it, or a Colombian emerald or a blue diamond or what had, he would try and, inculcate into me some of the essence of what he saw.
And could you see it too?
Yeah, I could at a very young age of, 6, 7, 8. But he did that not too often, but every once in a while he'd bring something home. He loved having a gem or two in his pocket.
I mean, you paint the picture of a man obsessed, literally obsessed by stones and obsessed by work.
Oh yeah, he was absolutely obsessed, and it was a delight. It's like.
Did he ever bring home all his clients?
Well, my mother and my father used to entertain, so they'd bring home clients and have them for dinner. That was always interesting. It was a little bit of stress for me as a young boy, seeing. There was Mr. Rockefeller, but they were the sort of creme de la creme of New York society, and also very moneyed.
And so he made these people became friends.
Some did, some didn't.
You tell a lovely story about a Maharaja who came to dinner, and you said first a whole contingent of cooks in turbans and saris arrived.
Yes, they brought all their retinue. And they took over the kitchen, and my mother just had to get the table set for 10, 12, and the Maharaja's retinue, usually aide de camp, and maybe a son or two, and we'd have an Indian dinner in our house. But I remember these curries. I still love curries.
You said some sitar players. The only thing missing, I thought, were the elephants in New York.
Well, it was hard to get elephants up the driveway. Yeah, but they would have if they could have.
So it must have been a very sort of exotic world to grow up in.
Well, it was very romantic.
And you talked about the fashions changing because of the war that really helped your father. You say that when Queen Mary was dressing more simply and taking off all the sort of layers of diamonds that she wore around her neck, that other people followed suit, and it was good business for your father.
Well, I think he was certainly a trendsetter, and he opened women's eyes, which didn't require too much opening, to the possibilities of what they might wear and how glamorous they might look and beautiful. And he created that, and also he created the ethos of modern jewelry, which he did by simple wire setting of platinum iridium alloy instead of these huge bazonka clips of a glob of metal and a diamond. But the diamond was somewhat limited by the size of the metal. So you get a big plate of bent metal bent into a nice poetic shape, but it was still kind of clunky. And he put all that aside, and he made these wire settings, which he more or less invented, with prong grips that held the diamond into place, and that was the beginning of a new era in the 30s.
So you say that tiaras, stomachers, the big collars, the Victorian Edwardian pieces became obsolete, and your father took advantage to pick these pieces apart and make them into new, modern, stylish settings.
Absolutely.
And change the fashion. And no one was doing that.
No, that's the way it's done. Well, it required a lot less metal. It allowed the diamond or the gemstone to shine, and it was lighter and brighter and much less expensive in terms of the metal and platinum.
There's something I've always wanted to know, actually, because Harry Winston now, the brand, always tell the story about their wreath, the wreath necklace.
Oh, yes. Well, he used to drive, particularly at the end of the week, from our house in Westchester to New York to his salon on East 51st Street, and one day he was waiting for the car, and he looked back at this Christmas time, you know, a nice wreath on the front door, and he saw from that a way of abstracting that and creating the style of making the wreath into a piece of jewelry.
So he did it with different cuts, sort of marquise, pear-shaped, circular diamond clusters.
They had to be arrayed, and the balance of the array and the angles at which they were all canted, or in the old days, the thing was made flat. And this way, there was always the right glimmer of shining light that would catch the sunshine or the light, and so it was a more universal piece in the way it shone and reflected light from the sun or from a room.
So it really was based on a holly wreath?
Well, that was one of the icons. That's the story he told me as a little boy.
Well, it's a rather romantic story. It's nice. It's a nice story.
It really is, yeah. And of course, my mother was his great model. She was very beautiful and a lovely figure and a kind smile. She was very kind. She wasn't ruthless beauty, and she wore his jewels fabulously. And I remember as a little boy, a very little boy, 5, 6 years old, she'd come in and kiss me goodnight in my little bed, and she was wearing some piece or several pieces of my dad's. I remember the cold of the jewelry and the warmth of her skin, and then I'd go drift peacefully off to sleep.
Somehow comforting, the cold of the diamonds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I want to talk a bit about how your father created really the idea of publicity surrounding jewelry. And you intimated in the book that he got the idea really watching what Tiffany did with the Tiffany diamond, the big 187 carat yellow diamond that was basically never for sale but became known.
No, they mostly just walked away in the vault, and he believed in showing them and creating publicity and events. So sometimes he would take a large, like the Yonker diamond he did. You know, there are two ways to manufacture a diamond. One is to grind it. So when you cut the diamond, you actually grind the facets. Not very, kind of industrial, not very romantic. The other was cleaning, where you'd make a slight groove in the rough diamond, and then you'd have a tool steel blade and a wooden mallet, and at just the right moment and the right angle, you'd whack this blade, and the diamond hopefully would split into 2 pieces and not 100. It did happen occasionally, but not very often, thank God. So he once cleaved the Yonker diamond in public.
And the Yonker diamond was 726 carats, the 4th largest stone ever found.
Yes, it's actually rather interesting that 2 of the largest diamonds in the history of the planet, the Yonker and the Vargas from Brazil, weighed exactly the same amount, 726 carats. And he owned and cut both of them, and they were all cut quite differently. But the 726 carats, of course, is an enormous egg. I would have found it quite daunting, but he loved it.
Where did he cleave it in public?
He did that in our place on 51st Street after St. Patrick's Cathedral.
And what, he invited the press to come and look?
Yes, he'd invite the press, and of course they loved the story. They'd never seen anything like it. And it would be a dramatic moment when the diamond was 1 and all of a sudden it was 2. But when you cleave it, you cannot soil the diamond in that direction. It's impossible. So you cleave it or you polish it. If you polish it, you polish all of it away. And if you cleave it, you break it into 2 pieces, and then each one is cut as a separate stone.
So it was a big moment for the press. Big moment for the press when he bought it.
Yeah, and even bigger when the diamond didn't blow up and explode into smithereens.
And then he mailed it. He mailed the stone to New York?
Yeah, well, he loved to do these things through the U.S. mail. Of course, in those days you could do things that you cannot do today.
But even then, it must have been extraordinary to mail a huge diamond. Just pop it in the post.
I know. I know.
And then it was the first diamond ever displayed at the Natural History Museum in New York, wasn't it?
I do believe that, yeah. Of course, now they have a collection of gems and minerals, as does the Smithsonian, where he sent the whole diamond and donated it. and is the nucleus of the collection. In fact, I'm about to make a new extension to that. And that hasn't been public announced yet, so I can't say too much about it.
An extension to what? To the stones in the Smithsonian?
An extension of the collection of the colored diamond collection of the Smithsonian. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, I myself am a lover of colored diamonds. Diamonds come in every color of the rainbow, not generally known. We think of white, yellow, brown. But they come in green and purple and red and orange. In fact, I own the largest orange diamond, which I bought on the eve of Halloween.
How big is that, Ron?
That was about 6 carats. Mm-hmm.
Which, if anyone's listening, is huge. For red or orange, it's a big carat weight.
Oh, no, there's never been an orange that large.
Didn't Halle Berry wear that at one point?
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
She did to the Oscars. Mm-hmm. And, of course, there was the Hope Diamond, which was blue, and the Dresden Diamond, which I went to Dresden to see. It was part of the one of the counts of Saxony, or part of Germany. And it was green. There aren't many green diamonds in the world. And I brought it over to America and mated it with the Hope Diamond, where it was seen in the museum. And it was quite an event. 2 of the greatest colored diamonds in the world, Hope being blue, Dresden being green. And each color of a diamond has a certain elemental impurity, or in some cases radiation. So blue is created by minute amounts of boron included in the diamond as it crystallizes. And green is created by irradiation by uranium in the ground.
So what are you going to be adding to the Smithsonian collection? Can you share that with us?
I am going to donate a collection of unbelievable colored diamonds, including a red one.
That's amazing. How big is the red?
The red one is 2.33 carats.
And have you been collecting these over many years?
Many years, yeah.
And when will that happen, Ron?
I don't know. It's in a work in process. But that's something that's been a love of mine.
Because that's really what your father hoped when he donated the Hope Diamond to the Smithsonian, that other people would leave their diamonds to create this national gem collection.
Yeah. Well, of course, they had never had anything like that. And I asked my father, why did you give it to them? He said, well, for one, it was allegedly cursed and I couldn't sell it.
No, really? Is that true?
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening have heard that there was this Evelyn Walsh McLean, who owned it previously, had just massive amounts of terrible things happen to her, didn't she?
Yeah, but that was, of course, a myth created by Cartier that sold it to her.
I read a story once, Ron, now you will be able to tell me if this is true, that somebody once got on a plane and they sat next to your father.
Yeah, that is true.
Will you tell the story?
Well, yeah, he sat next to some woman and he introduced herself. He said, I'm a jeweler. And she got out of the first class of the plane and left. The airplane took off without her.
Because she thought she was sitting next to the man who...
something.
Who had the cursed stone. And then I read that then she took another plane and landed up sitting next to a woman and said, God, I've had such a lucky escape. I got off this plane because Harry Winston was there with who owns the Hope Diamond that's cursed. And actually, she landed up sitting next to your mother because they travelled separately.
Yes, I believe that's true. Yes.
Who obviously didn't break the news to her. So anyway, so he couldn't sell the Hope. So that's one of the reasons that he donated it.
He didn't. He kept it for 10 years and gifted it to the museum, I think, in 58 or 59. And so it's there. It's treasury of the American people. And
it's just one of the most highly visited things in the whole of America.
I think it is the most visited item, object in the museum's collection. Mm-hmm.
And as you say in the book, Marie Antoinette's favourite stone. It's had quite a history.
And we know what happened to her.
Yeah. And poor Evelyn Walsh McLean's whole family perished, basically, one by one. But anyway, the Smithsonian's intact and it's kind of safe there. So he went on a massive buying spree, your father, in 1946 and bought another 6 of the world's biggest diamonds.
Yes.
So was this all part of his showmanship, or could he just not resist the big stones?
Well, I think it was a combination. He was on a roll. He used to call himself Little Harry, and it made him feel he was only 5 feet tall. So he was a very small guy, and he felt that he was really on a roll, and he loved it. He was very good at it, and he was very articulate, and he had a great sense of showmanship.
Was that because he wanted to be famous himself personally?
Well, it was part of the package, I think. I don't think he never was photographed. He didn't go out on the street and shake hands. He was quite modest that way, but he knew it was part of the ethos of creating images for great stones.
And so it was good business to actually have the publicity at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so these became the court of jewels that were shown at the Rockefeller Center?
Yeah, well, he did that. He thought it would be a great education for the public, and he created that about 50. But he took all of these stones that he had in his house, and he made this educational exhibit of what he called, rather augustly, the Court of Jewels, and it was shown first, I think, in Rockefeller Center, and then it traveled around a bit. In fact, it went around the world. When it was a brilliant idea, brilliant name, and part of his genius, I guess, to create that.
And no one's done anything like that since. Or could they? Because they wouldn't have that sort of caliber of stones.
Yeah, well, he was sort of the godhead of that whole thing, and of course Marilyn Monroe sings about it in her movie Gentlemen Prefer Wands. She's talking about diamonds, her girl's best friend, and says, "Talk to me, Harry Winston, tell me all about it." and of course he did.
But actually the interesting thing in the book is how for anyone interested in diamonds and the diamond market, it's fascinating because although he focused on these big stones that were the kind of cornerstone of his business and life, he really was a jeweler who made a lot of money in wholesale and retail in industrial diamonds. And you quote something like that he sold 1/4 of all engagement rings in the United States.
And that's what I'm told. Yeah.
Which is incredible.
Yep.
So those are smallish stones.
And he had these industrial diamonds, which during the war he set up a network in Brazil to preempt and interdict the Nazis from buying diamonds for their industrial war effort, and brought them to America for our needs in the industry to build things.
The industrial diamonds as well as natural diamonds.
Yeah, no, they were natural, of course. Now industrial diamonds are.
Oh, I see, because they didn't want the Nazis to get hold of them.
Yeah, they needed them to make cannons and airplanes and so on, and so did we.
So he was a hero in the war effort.
Well,
important.
I wouldn't say that, but he certainly helped out a lot. He had a man, Mr. Fry, down in Rio, who'd go into the interior. The dealers would come to him, mostly in Rio, and bring him what we call parcels, which are, papers filled with rough diamonds. And they would buy them. Those were bought for maybe $2 to $5 a carat, but they were very needed for industrial purposes.
You also said at that point that he was so well known around the world that a lot of the Jewish community who might have been fleeing Europe mailed their diamonds.
Yes, they did to him in the Zolta. Sent for Harry Winston in New York. He didn't know a lot of the people. He just put them in a part of a vault he had set aside for that. And at the end of the war, the people, the survivors or the successors, it was a terrible time, came to retrieve their ownership.
It's amazing. So the postal service was pretty important in his life, either sending big stones or saving people's lives. I mean, that would have saved people's lives at the end of the war, presumably.
Certainly lives and livelihoods.
Yes, incredible. But it's quite interesting because I guess, when people know his name, they don't realize that he had this massive retail business in smaller diamonds.
Yes, he did. Well, no, he didn't have the retail. He had the wholesale business to the network of stores that were sold at little corner jewelry stores around the country.
Uh-huh.
And he sold those cut diamonds to these chains.
And was that really the sort of profit center? Were the big stones or the small stones?
Well, remember that he was buying diamonds, rough diamonds, and cutting them, and of course you can't but buy what's called a run-of-the-mine. So he'd buy everything, and maybe 20% were gem diamonds, and 10% were industrial diamonds, and 70% were diamonds that would be suitable for wholesale. So he had a way of selling everything.
But what he didn't do was go to Africa and deal with the mines. He dealt with De Beers.
He dealt with De Beers, and they were a very sneaky bunch of people.
Do you want to tell us more about that?
Harry Oppenheimer was not nice. He wasn't nice to him, and he was rather ugly with me.
Why weren't they nice to him? Because he was too powerful in the diamond industry?
Yeah.
Because?
Well, because I didn't knuckle down to them, and me and my late father had come up against them and gotten control of certain diamonds that they wanted, and, it was competition. It was,
right.
He didn't like that.
So you started going to Africa yourself?
I went to Africa. I would go anywhere. My father wouldn't go to Africa. I went into the war zone in Angola, almost got murdered.
How did you get murdered? Nearly murdered.
Well, because I took this CIA chap, who I will not name, and he saw, instead of protecting me, a way to make a lot of money by murdering me. And when my team put me wise to this, I said, we're not going to Africa now. He said, oh my God, you can't do that to me. I mean, what are you talking about to you? You're being paid whether we go or we don't. Oh no, but my reputation. I could see that he concocted something very serious. And so I didn't go, and here I am.
And why did you want to go to Africa yourself? Did you feel that was dangerous? I mean, dealing with Angola at the time.
That was during the war,
yes.
Civil War. I went to see the rebel leader, Jonas Savimbi. He was really a great gentleman, highly intelligent, and should have run the country. But the communists came in and they took it over, and he wasn't properly supported by Americans. Welcome to the club. It's going on right now in Ukraine.
And so that was a successful source of stones for you?
Well, it was, but it didn't last very long because the UK and the communists were supporting the people in Labanda, and they took it over and they murdered Savimbi. But I would have ended up in the same place.
So you've alluded to some difficulties in the industry, and it seems such a glamorous industry, but because it's such a luxury product, an aspirational product, you do come across people who will behave very unscrupulously. And you had quite a good Sharon Stone story of...
Sharon, what a naughty girl. Well, she was, she was her own creation, and I had an office across from the hotel where she was staying at the time, and I said, you should go, and she was going to borrow them to be on a big television show. And so I brought them over, and she said, would you put the necklace on, Ron? And she leaned over it. She wasn't wearing a bloody thing under her dress or anything. So I said, well, okay.
I don't think there are many men who would complain about that, Ron.
Yeah. I wasn't attracted by this nonsense, And anyway, she thought she would keep the diamonds after she borrowed them, and claimed that she'd made a deal with me to represent our name, which she hadn't at all, and 3 people which she brought with her certainly didn't hear that. Eventually she did return them, but she was kind of naughty.
And actually, Harry Winston started the whole diamond loaning thing on the red carpet. I mean, did you have any idea how this would grow?
No, I didn't know it would get so big. Some of our competitors charged for this. We never charged anything. It was a delight to work with the talented people. And we never had a bad issue.
And it was with Jennifer Jones, was it the first one that you loaned
Well,
to?
my father, way back in the time, I mean, Jennifer Jones, there was Madonna, and, they loved to parade, and it very rarely created sales because
really?
Stars don't spend money on jewelry. They buy houses in Beverly Hills. That's it.
So they just borrow the diamonds and buy something else?
Yeah.
But the subsequent publicity presumably brought people to buy diamonds from you.
Yeah, well, it does help to glamorize the mark, and it's fun doing it, as long as they say they return them.
Was there a favourite actress that you loaned to?
Well, I like Madonna. I knew her quite well, my wife and I did.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, because there's so much now in the press about the lab-grown created diamonds, what do you think your father would have thought about that?
He would have poo-pooed them. It's not the real thing.
Not the real thing.
But of course, it did bring down the price of natural diamonds, and the synthetic ones, the lab-grown diamonds, are a lot less. But what do you expect? It's a product. It's not a God-given thing from out of the earth.
But it has challenged the industry, hasn't it?
Oh, very definitely, yeah.
Do you think it will recover from that?
No, because people make more and more lab-grown diamonds. People want diamonds. Many will want a diamond. They won't say what it is. You're wearing it on your finger. It doesn't light up in the end, lab-grown. So they have the same experience. But their admirers is the ones that buy the natural ones.
So basically, to get something special and rare, you've got to buy bigger. So maybe back to the yonker.
Yes, bigger.
In the book, you talk a lot about your scientific background, and that obviously you got enticed into the jewelry industry, but really at heart you're a scientist. I wanted to know what you would consider your greatest achievement and what you would consider the greatest achievement of your father.
Well, the greatest achievement of my dad was creating a long-standing brand built on integrity and prestige. Mine, I don't know really. I'm working on a drug for cancer.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Lovely chatting with you, Carol. Pleasure and honor to be with you, with your listenership.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. For this and other episodes of If Jewels Could Talk, please go to our website, carolwoolton.com/podcasts. If you've enjoyed it, please share the episode any way you can. And we love to have a rating and a comment, so thank you. We're also on YouTube, so you can check us out there, and I'm at Carol Woolton on Instagram. And please join me again in 2 weeks for the next Jeweled Nugget, where I'll be reporting from China, talking to Miss China, no less. We'll be discussing jewelry trends over there. It's where all the big brands want to be. It's where they see the future of selling jewelry. So let's find out the truth and what's happening. So join me then. I'd also love to have some questions from you, because our end of season finale episode, I'll be answering any questions that you have about jewelry or the podcast. And I look forward to receiving them. So start thinking about them now. Thank you for listening. We love doing the podcast, so please keep listening. Goodbye. If Jewels Could Talk with Carol Woolton is produced by Natasha Cowan, music and editing by Tim Thornton, graphics by Scott Bentley, illustration by Jordi Labanda. You can find our sponsors at fullygemstones.com and me at carolwoolton.com.